We move to priority business, building committee updates. Greg. And Chris. Thank you.
We do this together.
A Laurel and Hard, oh no,
It's safer that way. Good evening.
Good evening.
It's been a rather busy month for everybody, town meeting included. When I was here before you last time, we had just gotten notice that the education plan had been received by the MSBA and get back to us that Thursday afternoon. That was the week before school vacation. And that version of the education plan had lots of revisions, lots of questions from Boston. Again, they're used to a cookie cutter template. And what we are proposing is not a cookie cutter template. So Chris and I spoke during the following week. He started to work on some of the questions and answers on that revision. There was a meeting at the high school the week after school vacation, attended by the architect, the OPM, Mr. Conrad and Chris, and Kathleen Tringali, who did some of the work on a lot of the work in the education plan to start answering those first round of questions from MSBA. And today at 11:09, the fourth revision of that plan was filed with MSBA. And that point, I'll just let Chris talk about it because he's more intimately involved. I just heard the cats.
Okay. So I'll just explain a little bit more of the process, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. So what happens in the process is that the school puts together an educational program vision, and we did that using all of the faculty. We did the process a little bit differently than they used to. They would typically take a handful of people who would write the report, and we said that we would prefer to have everybody involved. So there were 3 different times when the full faculty provided input, and they were organized in different ways. Sometimes it was by department, sometimes it was by free block. We did one of our in-service days dedicated to that so that we could mix people up. So you get input from everybody on the faculty and staff, and then you put that into a report. We drafted the report. I think the original report was somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 pages. These reports typically run about 30 pages. Some of that is we have a lot more programming than other schools. Some of it is we were told to provide as much detail as possible and to think as big as possible. So we provided as much detail as possible, and we thought as big as possible. We didn't want to leave anything out. And then when the report is submitted, then there's a committee on the other end that has clarifying questions. And so there were a number of clarifying questions, which my understanding is typical. You know, what is this for? How do you use this? And then they asked us to revise the piece and submit it back to them. And the revision, I think, ended up being about 27 pages. And really one of the things one of the differences in the revision is that each department commented on how they would use a number of different spaces in the school. So there's a thing called a black box, which can be used kind of as a presentation center. There are breakout spaces that can be used for teachers and students to meet. So reading I didn't talk with anybody there, but my sense is that reading the document from their end, they saw all of this detail for every single department. So it might look like every department wanted its own black box and its own breakout session, and what they were really doing was just commenting on how they were going to do it differently. So one of the things that we did with the revision, it was not just editing. We took it all apart and put it back together, so we had each department talk about their program, and then we had one section that explained how everybody would be using all of those spaces. So a little bit of it was audience and who we were writing for, and like Greg said, I think they're used to having a much more straightforward report. The title of our report is the Outermost High School. Just saying. So that's an important book to read if you live here. I think the other thing I would say is that the revision of the report was quite a bit of work, but I think with all of these things, it was good work and it was refining. I think the document will be user-friendly for anybody who wants to take a look through it. And we have the 65-page unabridged version with every detail you can imagine on our hands as well. So as we go through the process, I think we have kind of an executive summary version for people who want to kind of look at it from about 10,000 feet. And then when it actually gets down to making decisions about what goes here and what goes there, we have our original document to go back to that has all of the detail from everyone in our program. So I don't think there's anything missing from the 25-page document, but there's just a finer level of detail that I think will be really helpful. I think we'll end up drawing more from the unabridged document, but other people might find the 25-page version helpful. So any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Questions for Chris? Yes, Dick.
Chris, a couple of the topics have come up around the whole project of the school, and one of them is an indoor track. Is that something that you guys are trying to include in this?
I think we would like to, unlike my previous life where weather wasn't a factor because it was 73 degrees every single day, the weather changes here. We like people to exercise year-round. So I think whether you put a track that goes around the existing courts, there's some talk of if you have a raised track. Now, if you have a raised track, that ends up being more square footage. So that's a whole thing to talk about. But we're trying to have the space across the school be as flexible and adaptable as possible. So there isn't the plans aren't specific enough to say whether there is a track or there isn't a track. But when we put in our report, one of the words we used the most was adaptability, because we're also trying to look 50 years out and how are these spaces going to be used. There are a few spaces that are customized, a few science labs that really need to be a certain way, but other than that, we're trying to keep it as open and flexible, including the furniture, as possible.
Yeah, please. Dick.
By raised, do you mean raised up to, say, 15 or 20 feet, where you've got kind of a whole story above, say with the basketball court, there's a whole layer, there's a whole floor above, the
Yeah.
track is kind of...
Yeah, I would say again, there have been no specific, conversations about what it would actually look like or how it would be designed. I've seen schools where there is a whole second story. I don't think that's necessarily, no one's ever talked about making lots of changes to the gym space. It's a large space that we use. Again, the group hasn't gotten to that level of detail. It's really around square footage and how that square footage is assigned to different programs. That's about as far as the conversation's gone.
So just to fill in more gaps, if you will, from my perspective, part of the process Chris did mention is that MSBA wants to make sure that whatever spaces we have and are going to add are used more than 85%, or at least 85%. So Chris spent a lot of time developing a master plan, which is on a 4x8 sheet of foam board with all the courses, all the classrooms, all the teachers, cross-linked, and as a visual proof of how the process is working and how NASA will use all the spaces to at least 85.
It's got a nice 1-inch frame.
Yes, I
around it of
hadn't
wood,
seen the
too,
frame.
and you can hang it in different places. Just saying.
So at some point you may see that. So that was also part of the process of doing a master schedule for 905 students and 100 and some odd teachers and sections of different grades. So that's why it takes so much long to get this stuff squared away, because again, we are presenting a, if you will, a customized plan for a customized high school, Nassau Regional High School, that has courses that they don't see in other high schools. They don't see middle arts. They don't see the kind of ceramics works that we have. I mean, the things that NASA offers are unique, and we want to continue offering that and make sure they understand that we want those spaces supported by this project. So that's where we are as far as the educational plan. When I have a version, I've worked with the project manager that he feels comfortable that will not be revised a fifth time. You will get that in an email so that you can peruse that. It's up to 31 pages because they were added some diagrams of spaces in general ideas. There aren't any boxes on in buildings. You will see bubbles, like thought bubbles of different things around the campus. That's all the level of detail that MSBA wants to see at this point. So once this is fully accepted by MSBA, which will probably be in the next week or so, then it starts the 60-day clock. There's 60 days for everybody to look at it, take a step back, and take a deep breath, and start looking, make sure we haven't forgotten anything and they don't have any more questions. If you run out the clock to 60 days, that means we're into June, July. So MSBA had a meeting at the beginning of July. We will be missing that meeting for them to vote on this project. So our time frame, our timeline, has been bumped into the future slightly. I don't have a specific time frame because everybody's been working diligently in Boston and here on the ed plan. So when I have that timeline, hopefully next week's building committee meeting will have that for everybody. I can send that off to you folks and show you that the building project will take a deep breath, but we're going to use the time wisely because we still plan on coming to the towns sometime in 2020, hopefully next spring, to ask for funding. So the building committee has voted to have the architect and the project manager zero in on 2 proposals. And if you go to our website and you look under presentations for the building committee, it's the last one in March. You'll see a series of presentations, and there are ones lettered 4A and 4B. And you look at those, and that's roughly where the building committee is leaning right now. Both of those have additions, renovations, mostly renovations. 4A has renovations of most of the property, demolition of the cafeteria building and part of E building. And 4B has a demolition of the cafeteria and part of N building, because they each have different footprints and they each have different flows of folks around it. I'll share with you that the one that everybody seems to like after it's explained, and you'll see this when you'll go on the website, it has visual overheads and it has cross sections of how the property would look based on elevations. 4A is most favored because if you look at the second floor, because it's 3 floors in some places, the second floor actually has a corridor that ties the whole campus together indoors. So that's a real interesting feature for everybody. It's a way to get to all the buildings, and you're secure from the first floor access for public. So it's intriguing that it has possibilities. We haven't got to the fine level of detail yet, but that concept is out there at this point. We will be adding, in some way, shape, or form, 40,000 square feet of new space. Now, that may sound like a lot. Put it in perspective for you. N building, if you've been on campus, that's 30,000 square feet. So it's some space, but not too huge. But you have to understand some of those spaces are because these locker rooms, shower rooms in the basement of the gymnasium, which is roughly 10,000 square feet, we have to abandon. There is no stomach for putting an elevator and putting kids back in those basement spaces. It's dark, it's dank, and it's really not accessible. There's always been air quality problems, accessibility problems. So right off the bat, of that 40,000 square feet, 10,000 is new lockers and shower rooms out the back of the gymnasium, between the gymnasium and the field. So that's not new construction, it's just different spaces in different places. We are seriously considering getting involved with getting some portable classrooms during the project. It would make using the portable classrooms a safety valve of allowing construction on existing buildings to go faster and keep the kids safe. They're not in a construction zone, and it's a lot quieter. And our project manager is working on a project in Lexington. When their project is done, which is about the time we may be starting, their portables become available. So we have a good shot at getting used portables for our project. A huge savings from buying new ones or renting new ones. So that'll be part of the program as well. We already had Years ago, there were portables on the property. They were taken away because they outlived their usefulness. But the connections are still there. Water, sewer, power are still out in that part of the property, so it's not a huge deal to reconnect some of the structures there. It'll help a lot with the construction time and the safety of the property as we go forward. At our last meeting, the building committee, as requested by MS School Building Assistants, has voted a preliminary, in really big capital letters, budget for this project. And that is completely soup to nuts, construction, all the equipment, all the furnishings, everything that's needed, the portable classrooms I just mentioned. And right now, that preliminary budget number is $140 million. It's a big number, but remember, that's, right now we feel the cap, the high point. As we refine this project, and it gets refined every 2 weeks, sometimes twice a week, we will be working on that number and bringing a refined number every time we have a meeting with you folks. The preliminary cost estimates, there's one done by the architect and his people. There's a cost estimate done by our project manager. They do them independently. Then do a conference committee where they meet together and see who's got what and who's got the best information, and that's the number they bring forward to us. Part of the 140 is also a level of energy efficiency that we're not sure how we're going to get at this point. We have a level of efficiency of roughly 50% of a LEED program that's basically complying with state building codes and energy efficiency codes. We can bump up to the next level, which is a net zero, if I remember right, is the phrase they use. But that has a cost. And as one of our building committee members said, okay, that cost, is it really worth the increase in construction costs to get that extra energy efficiency? Because everything has a payoff. Everything has a trade-off. So those are the kind of conversations we will be having as we move forward. The other thing that's going to happen is that we put together a small group to work with the architect through the summer and the fall of looking at building systems, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, what they call displacement air conditioning, and looking at things that make the buildings more energy efficient. It gives us more points for the energy efficiency, and it helps with the costs from MSBA as well. For instance, we're looking at solar hot water on the buildings. Sometimes there are outside building panels that heat the water before it gets in the building. There are manufactured windows that the glass themselves is actually a photovoltaic panel. You don't have to have the ones on the roof. The windows themselves, actually, they're wired. You can still see through them, but it has a little darker tint to it, and that's actually a PV panel. So that's also part of the things we would look at moving forward as to what these systems will add for efficiency and better visibility, and also nice quiet inside the building for folks to learn in. So as the project moves forward, all these renovation, all these refinements, we'll refine the cost estimates, and we can bring those forward to you. So my last two pieces are for the near future, and that is sometime in the next 3 months, I'll say June, July, or August, we will be reaching out to school committee, 4 town administrators, 4 boards of selectmen, or select boards, depending which town you're in, and finance committee members, so that we can have a large group meeting for a presentation from the architect and the project manager about a construction process called CMR, which stands for Construction Management at Risk. Now, let me first explain that normally you do what's called a bid, build, design, bid, build. The architect comes in, he designs the spaces, they put the project on paper or on computer disk, you put it out in the street, contractors bid on those specifications, and then you build that. And that's 99% of the time what you see here in Cape Cod and around the state. There is a process called CMR, Construction Management at Risk, where after you have the monies from the towns approved, you go out and hire and pre-qualify your contractor. So the contractor is working with the architect and the project manager, as they develop the specific plans for the project. The thought process is that having them on board helps you miss any mistakes, if you will, and has them give a reality check. Architects sometimes, it looks good on paper, it looks good on a board, it looks on a disc, but it's an idea, and sometimes those ideas can't be built. So the idea is having somebody on board that builds things, help you walk you through this process. There is a premium, there's a cost to that. And it's roughly 5% of whatever the number is going to be that would cost to have the CMR program. But we'd have to have that discussion, and the architect and the project manager are working on a presentation. And when it's ready to go and we've kind of vetted it, then we'll invite folks to come along, because the last thing we really want to be doing next year is getting into a explanation of the building process and not the building and project itself. You want to avoid that sidecar, that whole conversation that we didn't hear about this, we don't know about this, we don't like this. So that's why we have to have this conversation up front. People understand that if, and that's a huge if, the building committee would go down that path to vote that, there would be some understanding from everybody, the reasons why and the potential savings or costs thereof. And the last thing I'll leave you with is part of what we've been doing on the tours of the campus, those other campuses, is we've been talking to folks who've been through a project before, as you've been aware, and they are urging, pleading, begging us to avoid the major pitfall that they went through, and that is not having a dedicated facilities director on board before we start construction. Now, facilities director is not a custodian, it's not a head custodian, it is someone who is trained for smart buildings. Chris has seen these things as much as I have. These buildings have more sensors and wires and systems in them that are absolutely mind-boggling. You need folks who someone who understands this, can tune the building, understand how to tune the building, and train other people how to do this. You walk out of a building, walk out of a room in these buildings, they sense when there's nobody in the room, lights go off, heat goes down, air conditioning goes down automatically. When people come in, it responds within so many minutes to bring the room back up to human habitability. Those are the kind of systems that all these places have. They're very complex, and you need somebody on board before we put a shovel in the ground to do this. So that will be a recommendation from us. I've already collected some job descriptions, and I'll present that with the building committee. We'll look at it and just hand it off to you folks. That is your bailiwick, because you set policy for the district, but we will be urging strongly that this is what the district needs moving forward for this project. It's very, very complicated. So at that point, I'll entertain any questions. Yes?
Is this facilities manager just for the project or for a permanent position?
It would be a permanent position.
And it would be somebody that could deal with the other buildings in the district?
If that's how you want to approach it, absolutely. But again, these positions have, the two gentlemen we talked to, the one in Winchester was there for 3 years. After the school was done, he was on board 2 years into the project. The gentleman in Holbrook was there for the whole beginning of the project, selling it at town meeting, that type of thing. And actually, when we met him, he had been there for 2 years operating the building. So he was into the project 5 years already. So they know where all the skeletons are, where the mistakes were made in the building, where something's buried in the wall that nobody paid attention to. So those are the kind of things that they know and bring to the table. So
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have a today question,
okay,
Greg, on money.
okay.
A year ago, I think it was a year ago, the four towns approved the initial budget of this project at $1.3 million.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at the dashboard report that Giovanni will be presenting a little bit later today. We've expended $370,000 and encumbered $783,000. of that 1.3 million, which leaves us with 146,000, 147,000 in round terms. What's your feeling relative to, is that going to get us from where we're at today to the next funding round as you see it? I know it's subject to change, but
Not really. The answer is yes. We have a contract price with both professional groups that is well within the 1.3 million, and they are with us. I've asked the question several times in different ways, but yes, they are with us for that sum negotiated until we get the next vote from MSBA, which is the preferred schematic design, and they will work with us until we go to the towns for final funding for the project. They'll still supply the support group, and we'll meet less often, because quite frankly, this has been front-loaded. This whole educational plan process was the most intensive part of it. They were on the property a lot of local meetings. That will lessen to some extent. They'll do more stuff from out of Boston. We'll probably have meetings only every 2 weeks, or maybe once a month, depending on the need for those type of meetings. But to answer your question again, yes, we will have enough funding for that.
thank you. Very thorough presentation tonight. Thank you.
Yes, Dick?
You mentioned the shower and locker room areas. I have not observed these facilities, but I have the distinct impression that they really need to be redone. Where will they be? Will this be a new building, or would they be put into one of the spaces that's being renovated?
It will, in both scenarios, it is a new space constructed outside the current gymnasium, between the gymnasium and the playing fields. If you have been at the campus, and it's logically the best place to put it, because as teams come off the field, they need to go into a locker room, halftime, they need to go into a warm space in wintertime, so that's why those team rooms, those locker rooms, those shower rooms will be at that level. It'll also be a way of breaking up the traffic pattern that now circumvents the whole campus, and people have to cross a busy street with people coming and going, so that'll interrupt that traffic flow. It'll still have access from both sides, but the road won't be cutting through the property and endangering kids as they go between the building and the ball fields.
It seems from my recollection that if you build away from the existing gym, it would go right into the roadway.
That's what I just explained.
It will go into it?
Yes.
Oh, so they're going to have to reroute the road then?
The roadway will be a different configuration, yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right, now, can I ask another?
Yes, please.
This option, you said you've got it reduced to 4A and 4B. I mean, the way you described this sounds extremely interesting.
It is.
Are you guys going to do is that part of the presentation for this big group meeting you were talking about? Or is it something that you could show us separately and explain it? Explain the features and what's new and, what's brand new and what's renovated.
Yep. We can do both. We'd like to do as many as possible. I will talk with the architect and see what kind of meetings and what kind of presentations you folks would like.
Look, it's Chris would have to schedule it and probably work it with Tom, but to my view, I think that would be a very compelling thing to see.
Yep.
So, hey, Greg, I just want to join Jim in thanking you for this presentation.
You're quite welcome. It's our project. You folks need a comfort level with it.
Yeah.
We have 18 folks in the building committee, and some of them still aren't quite comfortable with it either, so it's a learning process. But as I tell folks, don't be afraid. If you've added anything to your house, if you've renovated a bathroom or a bedroom, this is just the same thing on a different scale, folks. Look, it's got a few more zeros, the space was a little bit bigger, but that's roughly what we're talking about.
A few more.
Just a few.
Yes, Ian.
Just had a question. Have you guys reached out and touched base with anybody from Monomoy who just finished building their entire new school building?
Not yet.
No? I was just wondering if you guys had any contacts or, being on the Cape and everything that they put into the design of their school. I wonder.
What we're trying to do is
Insights
look
from
at,
them.
quite frankly, schools that were just 9 through 12, just high schools. Monomoy has
Right.
the issue of it has 8th grade included, so it's a little bit different beast. We've been trying to compare apples and apples.
Yeah.
That's why we've been to Holbrook, Winchester, Plymouth South, Situate, and Raynham. Rockland, excuse me. Rockland. Yeah, so those are the 6 schools we've been to, and the STEM school in Boston. So we've been trying to keep those apples together.
Yeah.
At some point, we could easily go over and make it.
I was just wondering, I mean,
So I just wanted to add to Greg's comment on that. Monomoy is what they would call a model school. And it came out of the program of, at the time, the state was using, it actually was Ashland High School. If you go to Ashland, you see Monomoy, there's about 18 schools built within that model. And they had X amount of space that they could change, but much of it was, it's a very similar building. So it will be helpful from a mechanical standpoint in some other areas to understand some of the things to avoid that they worked with. But this is kind of a custom fit here in terms of what we're looking to do.
yeah, that sounds.
Absolutely, and just last commentary on that is that I've been to Monterey for a couple of presentations, and having sat in their auditorium, and because it was designed for middle school kids, your knees are jammed into your back for the whole 2 hours. So that's the first thing I checked in all the other buildings. All the high schools the seats are much larger, further apart, so it's much more comfortable. So those are the types we've already scoped some of those things out. But yeah.
Tom?
The other point that Chris has been working on for us is setting up tours. And Chris is moving forward with a program. Well, Chris, you can speak to it certainly, and so forth.
Wednesdays, 4 to 5, and walk the campus with me. And what we do is we go take an hour, and there's a route that you can go through the whole school, and it's an opportunity. I can talk about what our vision is for that space, speak to what's currently holding us back, and what we imagine it will look like going forward, and maybe even share some personal stories of when I was a
Easy
student
now.
there.
Easy.
I said maybe.
Tom?
So, thank you, and I appreciate Chris. He is a tremendously busy man on that campus, but we realize that there are a number of board members particularly who have requested the opportunity to see that campus, and Ann has taken it upon herself to send letters to all of the board members in all of our communities, inviting them to take advantage of this opportunity. So I thank Chris for what he's going to be doing for us, and certainly Ann to get those letters out. So we're really starting to ramp up an understanding, and as Chris alludes to his tour, where I want the viewers to understand, this is the tour that the MSBA took when they came down to eventually select us as a school. So we aren't hand-picking certain things that we want. You're literally, Chris is going to be taking them, as he said, throughout that campus, but it is the walk that we took to get into this program. So,
And that'll be on the website at some point as well.
Right. There is a video of it already, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the website.
yeah.
Any other questions for these gentlemen?
Oh, good job, thank you.
So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.